Welcome to the My Rules Are Better podcast. I'm Tom Barbalet, and today I have the pleasure of chatting with a listener, Barney Dicker, who found the podcast through iTunes, I think, just looking for dice rolling mechanics. Is that how you found the podcast?
I would say so, roughly. Something like that, yes.
So for folks listening in, obviously we cover a lot of topics in My Rules Are Better. Would you like to give an introduction to who you are and your broad interest in the wide variety of things that we talk about?
I am an academic and a teacher, but mostly a house husband. At this very moment, I'm, I suppose, about 2 years into getting back into games. And I would say probably getting into them in a more profound way than I have done before. And I think, that will be something that I think we'll talk about as it goes along. And I was trying to think of what would be the most concise, interesting biography of how I got to where I am. I suppose as a child, Star Wars was everywhere. Those figures were amazing. I still think they're amazing. The Flash Gordon film captivated me and still captivates me. A cartoon series called Ulysses 31. I don't know if you ever saw that. And that was also made by the same people who did The Mysterious Cities of Gold. Those things have just kind of seared themselves into my mind. And so I think that led towards, I suppose, an interest in fantasy and science fiction in some sense. As a young teenager, I think it was a kind of intense period of time where I got into Warhammer and the miniatures and role-play games. There was a comic shop where I lived that also stocked role-play games. So I got Paranoia, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, and Call of Cthulhu, which I'm feeling really inspired about again now, especially the Pulp Cthulhu rules are really interesting. But I think, and games, like everyone always says, games were floating around. I think the key moment might have been HeroQuest, because that just seemed perfectly playable and satisfying. What motivated me to get back into gaming was my son playing a lot on his iPad. He's about 10, and just how life was at that point. And I thought, right, because I'd lost my copy of HeroQuest, I thought, right, I'd like to get HeroQuest again. And I saw that it costs £100. And I think I remember looking in Argos catalogues, and it was, I don't know, 12, 15, 20 quid. I can't really remember. So I thought, well, I wonder if there's anything else out there that's a bit like that would fill that gap. And I tried to order a copy of Descent, because that seemed to be something that replaced it. And I think fortunately it didn't arrive. It didn't exist from the seller that I had ordered it from. And I opted for Mantic's Dungeon Saga. And I think, for the price and the contents and the mechanics and how it plays, I think that was a good choice. So that was our first. So here, a kind of HeroQuest and quasi HeroQuest was the way in for me in this phase, and then I think it went a little bit more in a kind of skirmishy direction, and then towards board games again. So I think I've got, at the moment, I still have those three things. Or I suppose if you include the role play games, you've got the four things. You've got the kind of, well, I don't know if it's actually four if I count it. I was thinking, the kind of dungeon crawlery type of thing. Then you've got a skirmish with a free terrain. Board games where, every time it's something slightly different, a different theme, a different mechanic, and then the role play games. So kind of, yeah, I'm enjoying bouncing between those different elements, those different types of gaming.
And in your correspondence with me, you mentioned two games that I'm not particularly familiar with. One was Games Workshop's Inquisitor. I was out of Games Workshop from about, I don't know, maybe 95 through to about 2003, which fits in perfectly with Inquisitor. So I'm not very familiar with it aside from the large figures. And you also mentioned Strontium Dog, and I'm not familiar with Strontium Dog either. So For folks listening in, as you said, these were two impactful games for you. Can you talk a little bit about both of them?
Sure. If I actually start with a bit of a digression into Games Workshop and White Dwarf, I came into it. Well, actually, I suppose I should rewind a little bit. I think another key thing was 2000 AD, where the Strontium Dog comic strip comes from, basically. I think I remember seeing a monthly copy, the 2000 AD monthly, where they reprinted whole series. And I saw the Ace Garp Trucking Company, an issue with them on the front. And the art looked great, and, these funny, strange characters. And that was my kind of way in, perhaps a whimsical way into what can be quite violent sometimes with 2000 AD. So for a very intense period of time, I subscribed to 2000 AD just when you had these wonderful kind of reproductions of paintings in the early 90s. And then, if we jump onto White Dwarf there, it was coming in exactly at the point where they had the Marienburg Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay setting being developed. And again, nice, colourful reproductions, all those wonderful scenery pieces to make, and all those colourful heavy metal pages. And of course, it was their own material. So they'd moved on from covering other people's stuff. There was also this series of features called Confrontation. And that I just thought was fantastic. And then I left the Games Workshop White Dwarf thing. And so it was only, I think, in this recent phase that I realized that Confrontation became Necromunda. And thinking, oh, wow, fantastic. And there's actually an interesting connection with that, going back to when Games Workshop had licensed Judge Dredd from 2000 AD. And so that early skirmishy part of 40K, there's some clear points of contact between the megacities and the hive worlds, and that you get in Necromunda. Inquisitor is something that I've found out more recently, and that seems to hark back to some of the early rules in 40K, where you've got a skirmish setting, but you have a GM, you have a game master. And I thought that might be something that we talk about a bit more later, because that's, on the one hand, maybe it seems a bit ridiculous now, but actually, the more I think about it, I quite like that. And there are some interesting things in Inquisitor which I think have sold that a little bit to me. With the Strontium Dog game, that's a miniatures game that came out last year.
Okay.
Gav Thorpe is partly responsible for both of them. He led on the rules and text for Inquisitor, and I think visually that was John Blanche. So all of that kind of the grimdark sketchy stuff. And he was the co-author with Andy Chambers, also ex of Games Workshop, on the Strontium Dog. I heard an interview about Strontium Dog, and it's got a full set of miniatures that are coming out. They've just released some more, I suppose, 6-9 months after the first release. So that's nice. And apparently there's going to be more 2000 AD content from Warlord, who are the publisher. I read I heard an interview with those authors about the game, and the interviewer mentioned kind of beer and pretzels kind of thing to make it seem like it's a bit easygoing. And it is, but I think that slightly undersells it, because I suppose from my point of view, the generic Games Workshop base format I just find really frustrating and boring. So it's not so much a case of beer and pretzels or of kind of a proper sit down game. I think it's more a case of an elegant system, or a kind of hair pulling out system of tedium. The key thing with both Inquisitor and Strontium Dog is that they have alternate activation for the figures, which of course is great for a skirmish level game, and I think even for bigger games, and I find the I go you go thing just absurd, completely absurd, and disengaging for whoever's not playing, and kind of, the fact that someone could win on the first turn just seems to me kind of ridiculous. But anyway, So, Inquisitor is a bit like, I suppose, you're just playing Chaos. It's a narrative role play skirmish game, and like I said, you have a GM who's overseeing the action and kind of narrating it as well. So you have rogue traders, you have Inquisitors, you have Chaos Warpers, you have pirates, you have mutants, you have any kind of Warhammer 40k setting encounter taking place, and it's all kind of set in this intrigue of the intrigue of lies, the lies of intrigue, or intrigue and lies in the dark heresy kind of narrative. So it doesn't matter what happens because it gets lost in the annals or the conflicting reports of the Warhammer world. One thing that I really liked about the Game Master being there is that for things like Overwatch, where a miniature will use an action or so to be ready to fire at someone or in a particular place, a player can whisper that secretly to the Game Master. So the opponent doesn't know who a given figure is overwatching, if you like. So that kind of increases the tension there, I think. And that's quite an interesting, I think that's for this idea of secrecy is quite interesting, or secrecy and surprise for games is quite interesting. And we've encountered that, my son and I, with how you spring traps in a dungeon crawler, because Mantic have created these little tiles which you flip over and it's a trap. But as soon as you've got a trap tile on the table, you know it's a trap. You're not going to tread on it. So nice as the tile is, it's completely useless. And I think there's a connection there with this secret Overwatch, where you could think, oh, I've just walked into that line of fire, which I think feeds into this narrative aspect, if you like, but also mechanically that the thrill of surprise. It's not chance, is it? It's surprise. Another nice thing in Inquisitor is that actions are dictated by your speed, and I think the maximum is 6. Or 6 actions, if you like. You can have a higher speed, but that would only be how many dice you roll. But your maximum actions would be 6, and you can do less actions. So this is the interesting thing. You look at your speed and you declare what actions you want to take and how many. So I want to run along this walkway and jump down onto this other platform and turn round and blast someone. So let's say that's, I don't know, four actions. You then roll a binary pass-fail dice, 1 to 3, 4 to 6. So binary yes, no for each action. And based on the outcome of that, you see how many actions of that, how far you get, how many of those actions you want to perform. And I really like that. There's also, you can then revise what you want to do if you have a really shit roll. That I think is good, but it also kind of goes against the mega blunder factor that could transpire. And it also makes me think, well, couldn't you just roll how many actions you've got first and then decide what you want to do?
Are the actions declarative? Do you actually say them out loud so your opponent hears what actions you were considering before you have the option of, if you were doing declarative actions, it would be an interesting case where you said, I'd like to do this, this, and this, and then you roll too low, so you can only do the first 2. You've then declared what your intention is, which your opponent can then utilize in their strategy as well. Does that happen?
Yes. Yeah, that's my understanding of the rules. Yeah.
Right.
And then and with your point there of how the opponent can start to utilize that, I started thinking, well, how could you start to intercept people mid-action? And I haven't had any great thoughts about that, but of how you could do that. But it seems like there would be that potential to intercept something. Also, this kind of slightly funny thing of what happens if you don't quite get there and you fluff it, and you fall flat on your face, or you run straight into a wall, or you drop your gun, so it's quite nice not being able to row back on that. It's I suppose in a weird mechanical way, it's a kind of a human thing. If you or I were thundering round a space Hulk, we might not be able to switch our guns on if we were dropped in there right now. I don't know if you've seen, what is that film, Predators, with Adrian Brody, where it starts and they're just falling through the sky. If we were in that situation, I wonder how many of our actions we would successfully perform each turn before a gene stealer pops up and melts our faces.
Yes.
Yeah, and I suppose the last thing to say about Inquisitor is there seems to be a really exciting indie movement where people have decided, well, we're not going to use the hideously expensive 52mm figures. We're just going to use normal 28mm figures, and we're going to do amazing conversions.
Interesting.
It's called Inq 28, or Inquisimunda. So people have kind of fused it with Necromunda.
Yes.
So it's this kind of, it is really interesting. And actually there's a magazine, free online magazine that I came across, recently. Is it called 28? I'll have to send you the link to that or something.
Certainly.
And it's got interviews and lovely pictures of converted things and kind of gang descriptions and nice stuff. So Inquisitor has it. There is also, if you dig around, you might find a living rule book for Inquisitor. Same with Necromunda, especially before the new edition.
Yeah, the same was true with Blood Bowl. Actually, Blood Bowl went through a wonderful renaissance when Games Workshop had no interest in it, and a bunch of third-party miniature manufacturers were creating really fascinating Blood Bowl teams, although they had their own independent league. But yeah, that's interesting, actually, because Games Workshop, towards the end of Inquisitor, which is when I started picking up White Dwarfs again, was encouraging people to make their own, but as you say, in the larger scale format. And I just thought this is, as you know, this is ridiculous because there's so much detail already existing in 28mm. So that's very interesting. You've raised a number of topics here, Bunny, and I'm going to pick them in no particular order. But I just wanted to talk a little bit about I think of it as a cult, and I look at very strongly, particularly associated with wargaming in the UK, that the Games Workshop tarnish of I Go, You Go in large format battles and in a wide variety just is so toxic. So as soon as you said that immediately resonated with me. And I did a podcast maybe a decade ago. I have a box of lead that I'm sending one of my listeners from that podcast who now listens to this podcast. So there's a legacy of maybe 10, 12 years. Every modern combat system that has this ridiculous I go, you go mechanic can no way describe, what is going on, in all the wide variety of theatres of war that unfortunately we still find ourselves in today. So I think what's fascinating about this is that Games Workshop as a thing, as an entity, I'm going to meet Ian Livingston and Steve Jackson in the UK at the end of August. And I'm thinking about just meeting these gentlemen. You think about the amazing things that this company has done in terms of just promoting fantasy and science fiction to so many generations and encouraging so many people. And obviously, video games and everything. Just the intellectual property explosion that came out of this thing is phenomenal. But one of the toxins that came through this was associated with these very strange mechanics, which people can't seem to psychologically, and I mean, historically they probably existed in older war games that Games Workshop just built upon.
Yeah. Now
I look at all the spin-offs that come out, or the, systems around the American Civil War, Napoleonic battles, all these kind of things where the I go, you go mechanic has no way of actually describing what's going on. But an interesting point, something from your notes which you haven't actually mentioned.
Yeah.
You talked in email correspondence associated with this notion of what realism means in games.
Yeah.
And how it's kind of antithetical to most of what we are attempting to do on the tabletop or the board game. Can you talk a little bit about that aspect of your thinking?
Sure, yes. I mean, just to say with the I Go, You Go, the new Necromunda has an alternate activation system. But, and this cracks me up, is that there are so many caveats, like if you're a leader or a lieutenant or something, that you could, as with one action, you can activate everyone again. So, or something like that. So you end up from a kind of reverse engineering back at I Go, You Go, because you wouldn't construct a team, a gang, that didn't have that functionality. Yes. Okay. So the immersion, realism mechanics thing. Yes. So yes, I started my email of notes to you with, I love game mechanics. You know, that it just fascinates me. I find it wonderful, and but not in a dry sense, but in the sense of how is it actually playing out, and what am I doing with this? How is so and so performing or playing tonight, or what seems to be going on? What things can you get out of it? And I think that's what, when we discuss gaming, especially as you point out in the last one, you know, like your last podcast, in a kind of a critical context, especially, you know, if we're really getting into it and analysing them, talking about them, it's pretty much all the time we're spending talking about the games. And sometimes I hear people say, "Oh yes, it's really narratively strong. It's really narratively immersive. The theme is really immersive. The rules disappear into the background. They're so intuitive. You just feel like you're there on the battlefield or the pitch or the whatever." And then they talk about mechanics. So I think it's a kind of a bit. It's like this attachment. It's a thing that people can't quite get rid of. And I think that at the moment, narrative, and I think about this, you know, as an academic, this is part of my wider concerns. I've realized that narrative at the moment is equated with substance and quality and, I suppose, ambition, depth, emotivity, sense, everything. I think everything gets lumped into narrative. If it's got narrative, it's good. And so my area of academic research is film, animation, graphic arts. And in film history and theory, there's an idea called the cinema of attractions, which has been developed by, principally by a couple of people, Tom Gunning and Andre Gaudreau. And they, in different ways, they emphasize the way the attractions are foregrounded, or you might call them the formal elements, the eye-catching features of a film are, especially in early cinema, foregrounded over the story. Now, I was teaching this idea to some students a few years back, and I showed them the beginning of Bram Stoker's Dracula by Francis Ford Coppola, which I think is an amazing, amazing film. And it the kind of the reality of this situation, of the balance between, if you like, the narrative and the trick, which I'm going to now equate with games in a minute, the mechanics, the thrill of the mechanic, this balance between narrative and trick, I think at the beginning of that film just sums up the situation. That opening scene where Gary Oldman becomes Dracula because he's lost his true love, his wife. That's it. That's narratively, that's it. Dracula is created when he loses his wife while he's away on battle, and he swears that he'll have revenge. That is it. If you think about it in terms of the tricks and the eye-catching features, it's off the scale. He ends the scene. You may recall, if you've seen it, that he kind of ends the scene by ramming his sword into the center of a cross, and blood starts spurting out of the crucifix in the church, and the entire chapel fills with blood. And that's after you've had a kind of silhouette slaughter scene and then all sorts of overlays. You know, it's a feast. It is a visual feast, but narratively, it's as thin as a thin as a hair. A hair's breadth.
That's what I remember about the film, actually. I tend to gravitate towards narrative films, right, deep narrative films. And yes, when I think of Bram Stoker's Dracula, I think of the fact that a lot of the depth that I liked in the mythology was, as you say, was moved aside for kind of visual effect here. But let's return to gaming in some regard.
Well, just to say with that I would say that depth is transferred to the visual. So my impassioned plea to you as we move to gaming now is watch those films for on the terms of that visuality as a thing of equal substance to the narrative.
Let's talk a little bit about gaming.
So if we now apply that principle of the narrative mechanic dynamic to gaming, because it's a game, because it has moving parts, because the agency of the players is the agency of the players compared to the passivity of an audience in a cinema, let's say. Because it's all about that agency of the player, I think, of course, we gravitate actually to the mechanic. The question then comes, well, what's motivating that, or what's driving that? Now, for me, I'm quite happy to pretty much just go for the mechanics. That is where the focus lies for me. However, of course, I do like there to be something about it. And I didn't speak about Strontium Dog. That's all about mutant bounty hunters. To me, that's a thrilling theme, and I can really go along with that. But I would cast it that the narrative is there to facilitate the mechanics, the tricks, the agency, the fluidity, the movement, the variability.
Have you seen games with miniatures? I mean, the thing that strikes me about a lot of this, particularly miniature games, is that the aesthetics of the miniatures are absolutely critical. It's difficult even to talk about games with not particularly well sculpted miniatures in this day and age. But there are a few games where the miniature component to it has a bit of a whiff, so to speak. I mean, it is very strange. I don't even know that there is a hobby of collecting ugly, misshapen miniatures. So I guess what I'm saying here is that there's already... I think of the visual aspect of the miniatures very much as part of this narrative. Obviously, it's a portion of it. But within that, what captivates people to play a game... And I think in terms of the mechanics themselves, this is what astonishes me, that for games with more visually appealing miniatures, more stunning, and sometimes even just... you talked about the breadth of possibilities in Inquisitor, because obviously the genre is so rich and being rewritten and all this kind of stuff. What component of narrative for you is just the aesthetics of the miniatures?
What component of narrative is the aesthetic of the miniatures? I would say the aesthetic of the miniatures are part of that trick, part of that eye-catching aspect. And what I want to do in the game is I want to move them around. I want to utilize them in different ways. So for me, the narrative would be about playing through shifts in balance, emphasis, speed, velocity, intensity, challenge, all of those things, which, if you like, are the deeper level that maybe, I don't know, Joseph Campbell and the Hero with 1,000 Faces type of theory would talk about, that there are these deeper archetypes. So I think there are not just character
those
archetypes,
things also
but actually
seem to describe mechanics as well. I mean, what you describe... Yes, okay.
Exactly. So and that would be where I would say, I think the narrative is supporting the mechanics, not the other way around. And to talk about this immersion issue, again, it's this kind of, you often find this phrase repeated, that a game is immersive if the narrative is strong. I think the immersivity is in the playing of the game, and that will be partly the narrative, but it will be partly that intense engagement with the mechanics, where someone says, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. That conflicts with this rule. Or someone says, I've got something that effectively trumps your cancels your action, you're still in it. And so I think it's that movement then perhaps between that sense of narrative and mechanics or trick or structure effect. That's where we're invested. That's where we are immersed. It's when the telephone rings, that's when the immersion is broken. It's when you have to go and do something else, or perhaps you accidentally knock a miniature on the floor and their gun falls off.
That really is, in my own experience, the dropping of miniatures breaks the mechanic very quickly, breaks the immersion and the mechanic together.
Because when you say, I wanted to disarm the character, I didn't literally want to do it.
Let's talk a little bit about the role of the GM here. Because what you described particularly associated, and you put in another interesting point, which I also want to acknowledge from our written correspondence. You talked about the notion of balanced points, and what does balanced points even mean when it impacts a scenario? And I think what interests me with regards to the Games Master, and certainly I think the Games Master is a critical element and actually should be a part of most wargaming rules. I think what's missing from a lot of wargaming rules is the ability to have an independent party as a participant, and a participant who's actually explicitly there to maximize an element of fun. If you look, I'm not sure if you're familiar with this phenomena, but the way Warhammer 40,000 is played in tournaments has become a thing in and of itself, particularly in this country, but also to a lesser extent in the UK. And these Warhammer tournaments are about two people maximizing their knowledge of particular rules and trying to manipulate these rules. And, and the notion of cheating within this environment is really fascinating as well. So, if I want to put the antithesis of anything that I want to be a part of, what happens in tournament Warhammer 40k games is really very well established. So I think the Games Master here, as someone who I would argue, strengthens the narrative over the mechanics. I mean, obviously is an arbiter on the mechanics in some regard.
Yes.
But really focuses this thing on the narrative, as you've described it, I think is absolutely critical. What are your thoughts on this? I'm assuming you're in agreement, basically.
So I would totally agree that the adjudicatory role, the mechanical role of the Game Master would be the most boring thing. Just to say no, that's out of range. Sorry, you don't have line of sight.
Yeah.
But again, that's the kind of drier end of the mechanics for me. What I think is so nice about a game is that you're using the mechanic, through the mechanics, you're building something through the mechanics, and the narrative then gives you that husk almost. I mean, that's being a bit rude about it, I would say. So I would say in defending what I'm putting forward here, that the Game Master is saying, look at what those mechanics do to our setup. It's suddenly shifted the visible dynamic on the table, as well as the meta dynamic that we're all sharing in here. And what about that puts X or Y much closer to achieving their aim, which again is just an aim.
I guess my perspective on the Games Master here, and maybe this comes through a misinterpretation of the early 40k rules, is that the purpose of the Games Master is actually to add a chaotic, pro-narrative, almost anti-rule element. And I think that's what fascinates me. I mean, certainly that's the way I played Chaos, is that the third party has to be there although this is difficult when the Games Master is also playing an opposing side, which happens in Just Plain Chaos. But if there were two parties playing opposing sides, the ability to add interesting chaotic elements, narrative elements, I think is very important, and really the role of the Games Master as I would see it in this context.
Yes, absolutely. And that's the same in Inquisitor. And you always get those caveat lines where they say, well, if things seem a little bit off or it's not that much fun, you can skew it a bit this way or skew it a bit that way. What I realized is that perhaps when in a game where there isn't a GM, both players are partially taking on that role of GM. So in a friendly game, let's say, where let's say there's the emphasis on a narrative or a campaign or kind of drawing out as much as we can out of the scenario. Of course, it's fun for everyone to be doing that together. And so I think it is possible that you have, if you like, more than one GM, that you do it together. That's a part of your identity.
And I think it's the absence of that quality, which is what concerns me about the competitive 40K play. Mm-hmm. I mean, I certainly listen to a number of podcasts, and occasionally I use a painting service here where a majority of their customers are competitive 40K players. I kind of fill the void for the poor burnt-out painters in the meantime with my eclectic things that I send them. But I think it's interesting, and I certainly periodically watch their podcast, videocast, whatever, where they talk about tournaments. And I think it's a cultural element as well. I think the US has a very particular perspective, which comes from, you know, cheerleaders and football players and all this kind of stuff through to hyper-militarism. But what you see through this is the notion of always being right, always being in control, always being powerful, and just dominating based on that. And when you have two people that come together with that perspective, it's absolutely amazing that they can actually, that these games, you know, can exist in some formative sense. But it is also, from my perspective, it's interesting, when I came to this country, I met an expat Brit who lived in Las Vegas. I was in Las Vegas at the time. And he, you know, he said, you know, you and me, we're alike. And then I watched him play a game of 40K, and I was like, and maybe not. Not today, thank you. And it was actually really interesting because I used to go over to his house, I think. I mean, we were living in a you know, one-bedroom tiny apartment. He never came over to my place, but we'd meet in game stores periodically. And it got to the point where originally I'd come around to his house and, you know, and there were certain civilized games. I think certainly Space Hulk, for me, because it does have certain elements of the game, that was a breakaway game. We played Space Hulk a few times. But to see him play 40K really ended the friendship. It was very curious, actually, because I sold a bunch of stuff on eBay, and he bought one of the books that I sold on eBay, and I sent it to him. And he emailed me, and he said, why didn't you just come round and give me the book? And I thought, how do we even go into this whole thing, right? So it is fascinating that the role of the GM here, and also the way these rules evolve in actual play, is a really fascinating part of this thing.
I've got an interesting thing here, that in the Strontium Dog game and in other games, they use cards, chicanery cards.
I was just about to say that. You took it away.
Yeah. Sorry. And that would also connect onto an interest that I have in certain board games, which are basically chaotic games. So the mechanics are chaotic. So the same with the Strontium Dog. You've got a deck of cards, you get some random cards, and you can play them at a random time, and they will have a kind of a chaotic impact. But you can also do that in other games use things, don't they, like rain or sand blast or something that will you know, hamper any actions that turn by any characters or something like that. And so with these chaotic board games, there are two that I've got in particular. One is Gretchen's, which is a kind of kids Warhammer spin-off. I guess it's published by Devir, and they brought it out around the time of this new orc road battle game that's about 100 quid or something.
Yes.
Which seemed to have a square board. And I thought, right, so it's just like Mario Kart, and people are just going to go round and round and bash into each other. With Gretchen's, it's very quick, and you lay cards which form the landscape. So those are randomly defined, and you might run into squigs or toxic liquid or some another card or something like that. But also, you don't get to look at your cards. So everyone else looks at your cards. So, and you roll dice. So some of the things, so they're 6-sided dice. So there's 6 different things you can do. One of the dice is someone has to tell you how many firepower cards you've got in your hand, which means you can shoot other Gretchens in their little cars scooting along. And it's really quick. You maybe go kind of 7 cards along. We find that a bit short, so we kind of go to 10.
Mm-hmm.
And it's completely unhinged. It's completely unhinged, and that's the mechanic doing that, and that's fantastic. There's another game called Portal, the uncooperative cake acquisition game, and it's the board game connected with the video game. I don't know anything about the video game, but that is completely demented as well. And you win by getting the most slices of cake. and there's a conveyor belt where the end tile gets taken off and burnt. And the only way you can redeem what's on that tile, which is getting burnt, is by sacrificing some of your own figures.
Mm-hmm.
And the game ends when you've got no more, when one player has no figures left on the board.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not necessarily the winner. And I think that's interesting, where the game can end, but that's not the win condition.
Yes.
And Portal also is very different between 2 and 3 or more players. The dynamic completely changes. So I wonder then if I can seize the GM back from being a real person and plonk it in the mechanic. And that would maybe lead back round to the points, the question of army points. And I think for me that was sparked by listening to one of those YouTube videos by, I think it's Wargaming Live. They're a couple of Irish guys, and they're hilariously funny. And I think it was on one of those. I've not been able to find it again, but they said, when we used to play 40k at the beginning, it was just great to say, well, okay, how long will these 5 Terminators survive against an endless swarm of orcs?
Yes.
And that's the kind of sentiment that made me think, yeah, I'm not that bothered about points. What will be a fun scenario? And you could say that means I'm a narrativist.
Games Workshop themselves used this in maybe not the last, maybe the one before the last, or maybe 2 back, the box sets for 40k, where if you actually, they created a series of scenarios where the points were completely imbalanced. And I had a fellow come stay with me at the time, and we calculated the points because the games were really fun, but it was clear which side was going to win. So it seemed like the points were just, and we worked out one of the points was like a 1-to-3 ratio. But that was actually one of the more fun games because you switch sides, you played, both sides in terms of which was going to win, which was going to lose. But you then started exploring the strategy. How long can you actually get this game to last? What is going on here?
Yeah.
And I think it's interesting that even within the hallowed halls of Games Workshop, occasionally for starter sets, for people, to get people interested in playing the games, points mechanics are just thrown aside. And instead, completely uneven battles, completely curious scenarios, but they don't say it explicitly. They don't acknowledge it within the rules in any way. And you need to have a background knowledge of the game to even know, these, as you say, these 5 Terminators, I think one of them was like that. It was like 5 Terminators versus like a Chaos Horde or something. I mean, it was fascinating to see how even within the hallowed halls of Games Workshop, they're willing, in order to get people to start playing the games, to discard this fundamental thing with regards to points.
But of course, that would be so much more fun if it was alternate activation and not,
of course, yes.
You go, I go, I go, you go, whatever.
Well, unfortunately, they are limited to some basics. Buddy, I've had a lot of fun doing this. And excellent. I would like to do this again sometime. So let's allow the listeners to listen to this and let some of these ideas percolate. And maybe if listeners can start submitting topics for us to discuss, because I think you've offered many different possibilities here. But I think the ability to have the chance to chat with you is just a luxury today, and I'd like to have that luxury in the future. Can I ask you just one question? I sent you a parcel of miniatures, which you had claimed through correspondence you hadn't yet opened.
Yes.
Is it still a paperweight?
It's still unopened, and I'll tell you why. Because what I would like to do is make a little video of it and put that on YouTube.
Well, because I'm all in favour of that. So
excellent. Because I thought that's one way I can spread the word about your good work. And then I also thought, if I call it something like Free Citadel Miniatures, how many hits it'll get.
Yes, I'm not even sure what I had some memory. I think it's in a old VHS case that I was.
Okay, is that what it is? Is that what it is? Yeah, that's worth $1. It says here, plastic case, $1.
Yeah, believe me. Yeah. So no, I sent some World War II miniatures. They're actually really beautiful miniatures. In this case, it had 10 miniatures inside, neatly wrapped and what have you. And I thought, this is a really functional case. I think I packed probably somewhere closer to 30 miniatures in your case.
Okay.
And I honestly no longer have any... Actually, no, I think you are actually one of the lucky ones. I think you actually have... you actually, honestly, probably have more Citadel miniatures in your case, I think, if I recall correctly, than anyone else that I sent anything to, including, basically, it's all old school Citadel stuff as well. So, yes, it would be
very
disruptive
sweet
in a variety of ways if you actually filmed the unboxing. But I have another box here that I'm sending to Ireland today, or Northern Ireland, should I say. And, look, for folks listening in, I still have 3 cases worth of figures to send on to folks. So if you're listening and you would like to, and please, when you do the unboxing, state in the unboxing as well that others could get similar parcels if they're interested. So
I will do that. I will do that. You know, I'm very excited to know what's in there. Yeah. I suppose if there's one little thing I could say to close for me that I really wanted to say, and we have talked about it, is this feeling of having your identity as a gamer, or know what I mean. What kind of a gamer are you? What self-awareness do you have as a gamer? So for me, it has to be alternate activation. You mentioned a couple of podcasts back that you don't like hexes. You want free terrain. I don't mind the hexes so much. What gets me is when the board is fixed. Yeah. I can't stand a fixed board. I just want a new combination possibility, even if you don't use it. The fact that I suppose I prefer dice over cards or something like that. And I think it's a really interesting project to get to know your cognitive mindset through the types of games. And I think that's a way of navigating the sheer volume of different games there are, to kind of start to pick what your preferences or your peccadillos are, and to kind of work that groove.
Well, HeroQuest ruined you, because I mean that's what established that philosophy in you, right?
Well, I suppose, it was either that or Flash Gordon. I don't know. I mean, you know, the Flash Gordon film is such a perverse film, so I don't know.
But I'm talking specifically about the board mechanics of HeroQuest, is what you've described perfectly. So, yes.
I guess, you're absolutely right. Yeah, absolutely spot on. Thanks. Thank you.
Barney, it's been an absolute pleasure. Let's work out sometime we can do this again. The exciting part is always putting this thing out to the listeners and seeing what they dream up through this. So I'm looking forward to getting listener feedback associated with this as well. One of the things that I really liked was hearing the birds of Germany in the background. In fact, it's right there now. I forgot how songful the German countryside is. So thank you for also sharing.
In the mornings, it's quite a great cacophony.
Sounds pretty good.
So. Yeah, maybe we can speak at really early in the morning for me. I don't know if that's late at night for you or something you get to hear, but that might be next year. But at our rate, maybe
I turn into a pumpkin after about 9 p.m. here, so it might be difficult.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Maybe we'll just maybe we'll find listeners in your part of the world that you can talk to and get that at the same time. So we'll work it out, buddy. We'll work it out.
Thank you ever so much, Tom.
It's been a real pleasure.
It has been. Yeah.
I'll talk to you soon. Take care.
Absolutely. Bye bye.